The Republic is the most famous work of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, and it's written in the form of a Socratic dialogue. So it's just an interaction between people, and it's a book about justice, the ideal state, and the philosopher king, and everything else of that nature. So the book starts off by Socrates saying, or just telling about his trip. He says, "I went down to Piraeus with Glaucon to view the festival and to pray to the goddess. And when they were planning to go back to Athens, a slave boy of Polemarchus comes up, and he holds Plato by his cloth, and he says, 'Wait here. Polemarchus orders you to wait.' So, and then Polemarchus comes and says, and he tells Socrates, 'You're not going anywhere. You're coming back with us to my house.' And then Socrates says, 'Why? We weren't really planning to stay here in Piraeus. We were just planning to go back to Athens.' And then Polemarchus says, 'No, you're coming back with us. See all these men here? Either prove stronger than these men, or stay here.' And then, of course, they all they convince Socrates to stay in Piraeus and to come back to Polemarchus's house. And then the father of Polemarchus, who is called Cephalus, he greets Socrates warmly, and he says, 'Socrates, we don't see much of you here down in Piraeus. If it weren't for old age, I would be coming up there to Athens more often than I do usually.' So, and then Socrates asks Cephalus, about old age. What's it really like to get old? I'd like to learn from you what it's like to get old." And then Cephalus says, "Once upon a time when I was younger, I used to think that old age is really unbearable. But once I get older, I find that old age is bearable once, or provided that you have money." And then Socrates asks, "Well, what is it about money that makes old age so bearable?" And then Cephalus makes the case, "Well, when I was younger, I used to really laugh at at the stories of the wrath of the gods and Hades and hell and whatever. And once you get older, you kind of start contemplating your own death and contemplating the fact that you're going to die, and the gods may really exist, and they may really want to lash out to the people who did bad. And I used to be a neurotic man, and I used to do all kinds of bad, and I used to want money and women and whatever, and I used to do all kinds of things to get to those things." So he says, when you have money at an older age, it makes you really kind to those people, and less erotic. So I've been giving a lot of money to the people that I swindled, and then the gods, they're not going to forgive you if you don't do the right kinds of sacrifices and the right kinds of prayers, which all require money. So that's why it's better to. So that's why it's not bad to get older, provided that you have money. And then Socrates asks Cephalus, what's justice then? If you Cephalus was kind of alluding to the idea of justice when he was talking about the gods and Hades and whatever. So Socrates asks him, "What's justice then?" And then Cephalus says, "Justice is giving back what is due." And then Socrates says, suppose this. Suppose you take a sword from a friend, and the guy then goes crazy after some time. Should you then give him back his sword? And then Cephalus says, "Well, no, you shouldn't give him back. You shouldn't give him back the sword." And then Socrates says, "Well, what is justice then?" And then Cephalus says, "Well, Socrates, I do have a some sacrifices that I still need to do. And here's my son Polemarchus. He can continue the argument with you. So Polemarchus continues the argument, and he kind of tries to strengthen the case of his father's argument. And he says, well, if Simonides is to be believed, then justice is doing good to friends and harming enemies. And so Socrates kind of alludes to, or he kind of tells him that, hey, you should like stay back from, or you should just refrain from quoting philosophers and poets, and instead of doing that, just think on your own and give me really the idea of what justice is. And then he goes on to explain why the idea of justice by Simonides is a problem, or it contains problems. He says that you don't always know who your friends are and who your enemies are. So when you're doing good to a friend or somebody who you think is a friend, more often than not, you're actually doing good to an enemy, and the other way around. So and then the other problem is the fact that by nature people are good, and you should always do good to good. So and then he gave the analogy of when a horse is sick. When a horse goes sick, you don't give him the virtue of a dog or the medicine of a dog. You give him the medicine for a horse. And then the same for human beings. When they do something that is inhuman, you should try to improve them instead of trying to harm them. And then Thrasymachus steps in to the argument, and he says he kind of got angry with Socrates, and he says that, Socrates, what are you doing? You always do this. You ask questions and then you try to refute the argument that is made by the other person. He says, I want you to tell me, Socrates, what is justice? What do you think justice is? And don't tell me that it's the helpful or the needful. Just really tell me, what do you think justice is? So this tells us something about Socrates and the fact that he's a concrete kind of guy. So he's a tables and chairs kind of guy, as Professor Suguru explained it, and he doesn't really like abstractions and mathematics and whatever. So Socrates then says, I'm not really not as knowledgeable and as wise as you are about such matters. Why don't you tell us what justice is, and then we'll go through with it and examine it together. And then Thrasymachus says no. And then they go back and forth about who should make the argument first and then who should go second. And then Thrasymachus says, Socrates, what do you think you'll have to suffer if my argument for justice is better than yours? So Socrates says, I'll have to suffer what any other man this foolish has to suffer, which is the pain of learning. And then Thrasymachus says, that's very agreeable of you, Socrates. But how about you pay a fine in money too? And then Socrates says, I'll pay you when I get some. And then Glaucon says to Thrasymachus, he's kind of like getting sick of all this back and forth. He says, Thrasymachus, me and my friends, we have some money, and we'll all contribute to Socrates, whatever Socrates has to pay you. So just for the sake of money, speak. What do you think justice is? And then Thrasymachus tries to make the case, or he just says literally, justice is the advantage of the stronger. And then he tries to praise himself and to kind of put down Socrates. And then Socrates says, okay, don't go away. Let's kind of examine what you just said. So Thrasymachus makes the argument that injustice is better than justice because unjust men always get the better of just men. And then Socrates says, well, he brings the argument or the analogy of the doctors. When there are two doctors in a room and one patient, and one doctor is operating on the patient, the other doctor is not looking at them and is not trying to get the better of the one doctor. He is, if he sees that the patient is being well therapeuted or just whatever, it's not a problem to him. But when the doctor, when a quack doctor comes along and tries to do something that has nothing to do with the art of medicine, of course, the other doctor has to step in and say that this is not good. So he says that it's only just for that it's only good for the just men to get the better of other men, that unjust men aren't supposed to get the better of everybody else. And then Thrasymachus says, "Are you really making the case that that doctors don't become doctors for money, or that shepherds become shepherds just for the flock and not for the milk and the meat that comes their way?" And then Socrates brings back the analogy of the doctors, and he even says that rulers actually don't rule for the sake of money. Or the good rulers don't rule for the sake of money. They rule out of fear for having somebody else who is less competent to rule the city. So they rule because they are scared that somebody else would come along and then destroy the city. So this is the end of book 1, and in book 2 and in later books, Socrates actually tries to make his own case for what justice is, and what is the ideal city, and how should we educate the philosopher king, the one who is the philosopher and who is also the king at the same time. So that's it, and thank you for listening.